Thank you. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon. I was healthy for 52 years. I'll tell you a little bit more about that and about what happened that changed my status as a healthy, vibrant person in the community. During the time that I have been a patient at Duke, that I have been a glioblastoma patient, I've learned a lot about life, about what it's like to lose your health and fight every day to get it back. And I've learned a lot about healing. And I believe there are three components to that. The first is the best available science, technology, and expertise, which is the original reason I came to Duke when I first saw a big white spot on an MRI. The second, which I would have underestimated, is a supportive family, community, and self-care is so much more important than I ever realized. And then I'd like to share, too, that perhaps of all of these, the greatest component to healing is the approach to care. And so I'll be commenting some on that as we go through this today. I am a patient here at Duke at the Preston Robert Tisch Brain Tumor Center at Duke. So I got the Preston and the Robert right, in the right order there. But I think it's applicable anywhere that you find yourself practicing and living and healing. So this approach to care is not just about how my care team takes care of the tumor sites in my brain. And it's not just how they take care of me. It's how they're helping to sustain a life, a livelihood, a family, a community. And so I hope I can make that a little more real than it might sound. I know it's on your poster, so you've probably had it drilled into you from the beginning, but it's a very real thing that I hope I can put kind of a face on. So the beginning of the story starts with those 52 years of being very healthy. So I'll very quickly give you a bit of a background on my life. I'm a professor's kid, a teacher's kid, always curious, always learning, which is a pretty helpful background when you suddenly become a patient of a difficult disease. Studied math and science, big rock and roll fan from the beginning, still am. Went to UNC, studied math and computer science, emerged a techie, and worked in the technology industry for about 30 years. Everything from programming to product management to marketing to, channel programs, you name it, all kinds of things. Along the way, came to business school here at Duke. Got married, took a lot of great vacations, have a son and daughter who are both teenagers, and life continued. I was a healthy, this word keeps coming up until a moment from now, working mother, very fulfilling career, lots of fun, and ended up until about a year and a half ago, I was an executive with a cool Silicon Valley startup, living here, but this cool startup that allowed me to put together everything I've ever learned. It's just kind of the kind of way that you want your career to go. I didn't want it to end yet. And then I've put a life estimate on here for myself. After the presentation with Dr. Friedman, you might not believe such a number now, I get that. But both my grandfathers were still working when they were 90. They were healthy, they were working. One was a preacher and one was a high school physics teacher. And I figured, I stand a pretty good chance. I better save a lot of money for a really cool retirement. So that's what I was thinking. And look forward to sending the kids off to good schools, grandkids someday, all those things, writing a book maybe someday, all these things, that we all have our dreams of what things might be like in the future. And then everything changed. I dropped my keys. Picked them up, dropped them again, dropped them again, dropped everything. I was having lunch with a customer, dropped my knife. Left hand, something was wrong. And I found myself back at Duke, this time not a student, but as a brain cancer patient. I call it accidental retirement. When people ask me, are you retired? I prefer to say yes than to give them the longer answer that you're going to hear. But I have gone from being an independent, adventurous, successful, professional to being dependent, tethered in many ways. I have a wonderful life, because darn it, I'm going to have a wonderful life. Therefore, I make it so. But it's just a huge change. It's not, just a disease, right? It's been a change for my life and everyone who cares about me. And if I had to choose one word to say, what's it like to be a glioblastoma patient, I would say it's unpredictable. My husband has an analogy that he likes to use for this, because this is definitely his journey too, as you can imagine. He says, our life has been like a ride on Disney World's Space Mountain roller coaster. We're in the dark with no idea what's coming next. It's a pretty good analogy. So with that, I'd like to share the ride with you. So I mentioned to you that I dropped keys, I dropped pens, I tossed my iPhone all over the place, just all these things. It took me a while to realize that it was my left hand that was doing all of this. But then after a couple days of that, I realized that my keyboard wasn't working. But somehow my friend's computer's keyboard wasn't working either. And she was able to use my computer just fine. So, as much as we might like to say that, IT needs to fix it, this was not an IT issue. My hand had stopped working. Go to the primary care physician. My greatest fear was Parkinson's. And it's because of a relationship, a friendship that I had with someone who had Parkinson's, and some experiences that we had together. That was my greatest fear. And the primary care physician was able to take that off the picture immediately. She knew that it was not that, and she was concerned that I could have MS, and so she sent me for an MRI. Thank goodness she sent me for an MRI immediately. So I go get an MRI. I'm leaving the room, ready to head to the office for another good day at work, and I take a picture of the MRI machine because I think it's so cool. I got to tell my kids about it. I got to text them this picture. So I think everything's going to be just fine. And then as I'm leaving, one of the techs puts her hand on my shoulder and says very gently, the doctor wants to see you now. My follow-up appointment is in a week. He wants to see you right now. This is not a good thing. I go over there, there's like 10 people in the waiting room, they call me in immediately. This is not good. This is the picture that he showed me here on the right. That is in the parlance of golf balls being what I guess you use for measuring everything. It was 1.5 golf balls. Somehow I remember that, but not the millimeters. But anyway, so I had this tumor in the right parietal lobe, and of course you can't tell what it is until you have a tissue sample, so you can't tell whether or not it's glioblastoma. But the neurologist felt like it looked like a fairly classical presentation that could be glioblastoma. So he wrote 2 things on a sticky note that he gave me. The first was glioblastoma, and the other was the name Alan Friedman, whose name you've heard mentioned already. So armed with MRI results and my sticky note, I decide that I'm not going to be patient. I'm not going to wait. This is on a Friday morning. I'm not going to wait until the next week and make an appointment and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to the Duke ER. I'm one of those people that breaks the rules, right? I show up at the Duke ER. There's people there with all kinds of issues. Nobody that looks like they're in an immediate crisis, but lots of issues. And I walk up to this lady who probably hears the craziest stories ever, and I say, I've just been diagnosed with a brain tumor, And I'm here for a neurosurgery consult with Dr. Alan Friedman, please. She's thinking, you know, she hadn't heard that one before. But she put up with it, and I went through the process with, you know, the ER process. And of course, it was preposterous to think that I would see Dr. Alan Friedman that day. But that's okay, because my ploy still worked. And the man on the left side of the second row here, Dr. Odagwa, does anybody know him? Yeah? Oh, he did a fabulous job of making me feel like I was in the right place. So here was someone who came into the ER to see me, who understood not only what the picture meant on the MRI, but who understood what a new brain tumor patient is starting to go through. So he got us through that day. He got on the phone with Dr. Friedman, who was at a conference, and he said he would take me as a patient. So by the end of that day, by the time we had to tell our children that I had a brain tumor and that this was going to change our life, I knew that I was going to be a patient of, as Henry just told us, the best neurosurgeon on the planet. I'll take it. That's what I'm after. So several other angels in this picture right here helped me during my journey as well, but that was how I started off. So the next thing is I find myself, you know, I'm a patient at Duke now. I find myself on board this train or this roller coaster, whatever you want to call it. And as we just heard from Dr. Friedman, the standard of care is surgery. And I'm guessing one of the reasons that I was taken so quickly as a patient somebody asked the question of how do you accept which patients. You know, I don't know that many people have that ER approach like I did, but it worked. My tumor, if you remember from that photograph, it's on the surface. I don't know for sure, but I have to wonder if maybe that's one of the reasons, that and being healthy, other than big old brain tumor, I was extremely healthy. So I have to wonder if that wasn't a reason that I was accepted quickly, because it looked like a resection would be pretty clear. So anyway, so then here's the orders that were placed at a preliminary visit that I went to. Case request, operating room. Craniotomy for brain tumor resection and cortical mapping. Microsurgery, harvest tissue, ultrasound intraoperative, stereotactic computer-assisted procedural cranial intradural, application cranial tongs, calipers, stereotactic. And that was about me. This person who's just kind of sailing through life and everything always went just fine. All of a sudden, this is what is next up for me. So I knew that I was staying with Duke. I didn't want a second opinion. I skipped that whole part. In fact, nobody I knew even encouraged me to go check different things. I spent almost no time on search engines, because what you find does not help you have hope for the future in that moment. You got to be kind of careful with that. So next up was to determine, okay, what does our family do now? Now that one of the four of us is going to be out of commission for the summer, and who knows after that, what do we do? Well, my kids are teenagers, and they had pretty big plans. My son, who's the third yellow jersey from the left there, Alex, had a plan to ride his bike across the country, and I wanted him to still go. And so the deal I made with him is, it's your decision. He was 16 at the time. It's your decision, but I want you to go. This is this awesome adventure that you and your friends are going on. And if something starts to go awry, you and your bike can just fly back from wherever, you know, and we'll just stay in touch, and we'll let you know how I'm doing, and you'll do the same, and it'll be all right. And then he was going off for a year abroad, a State Department-sponsored scholarship program for doing his high school junior year in Germany. And here in a picture with Angela Merkel, you can get a little glance at how amazing that was. Again, I said, it's up to you. but I want you to go and do this great, I want you to live your life. I want you to have this great adventure. And so he chose to do that. And then the flying number 11 on the right is our daughter Jackie, who was 15 at the time. She had all kinds of plans to go here and there for volleyball tournaments and all this kind of stuff. And so same thing, go live your life. We'll be in close touch. She was able to stay here until after my surgery and then take off, so to speak. So that was a very big part of the beginning of the brain tumor journey, is what about the family? You know, how do I tell my parents? All these sorts of things. My friend Nathan had a fabulous one-liner that I've repeated so many times. If you're going to have a brain tumor, this is a good place to live. He said this in our front yard in Chapel Hill. And as I reflect on it, I think there's really sort of two reasons. One is on the left, you can see some results from a functional MRI, which I use as representative of expertise and technology that's in use here at Duke. Functional MRI results not used by many neurosurgeons, but Dr. Alan Friedman uses it because it tells him more about specific tissue and what's responding when. And so he used it before and during surgery. And then on the right, just yet another case of where I felt like the team was taking care of my family, not just me, certainly not just a 1.5 golf ball size mass in my brain. The story I'd like to tell here is that I keep saying Dr. Alan Friedman because we have the Friedman brothers, as you heard earlier. Sorry about that. Yeah, there you go. He'll thank me maybe, I don't know. So Alan Friedman checks in his brain tumor patients personally. So Sunday morning, we send our son off on a flight to Oregon to go start his bike ride with his back wheel in the Pacific Ocean, and he'll end up later with his front wheel in the Atlantic Ocean. But my husband and daughter and I come to the hospital to check in, and the check-in makes it sound like a hotel, to be admitted. And the folks at the admission desk say, oh, he's the only doctor in the whole place that does check-ins himself. And we have a little conference room for him. And he didn't just check me in, he checked my family in. So he sat across from 16-year-old Jackie, and he said, Jackie, imagine I have a handful of sand. That pile of sand, that's the tumor that we see on the MRI. I'm going to operate and take that out. But if you imagine that there's grains of sand all over the table, right? She's like, yeah. And he said, that's what we're going to go after with chemo and radiation. And I mean, she's pretty smart, but she immediately got it in a nutshell. So we've been patients ever since and never looked back. So at this point, I can either freak out that somebody's getting ready to open my skull like a jack-o'-lantern, or just find humor wherever we could find it. And we chose the latter, which helped out a lot. And we just found a lot of ways to have humorous moments. And the staff was more than happy to go along with any moments of that. Pre-op, I told Dr. Friedman, I want to remember as much as I can. I'm so curious about this. I mean, it's devastating, but it's just so interesting, too. I really want to remember whatever I can. And he said, good, that makes my job easier. You'll be conscious through most of the operation if that's what you want. And if you change your mind during the operation, you just tell us. I'm sitting here thinking, I've never had an operation in my life, And I'm sitting here thinking, so I can just sort of say in the middle of it, excuse me, I've decided I want to go to sleep now. I didn't have any idea what this is going to be like. But the PA and I had conversations in advance. James Carter and I had conversations in advance about what my children were up to, some things about my background. He knew me pretty well before the operation, so that during the operation, you can tell what's coming. he would ask me questions. He already knew the answer, so it was sort of real-time cognitive testing. He could tell whether or not I was able to answer these questions because he already knew. We're both from Eastern North Carolina, so we joked around about some of the sayings that people use in Eastern North Carolina, and we carried on this conversation. And then every once in a while, I was strapped down with this white tube of towels or something so I could see his face, but I couldn't see anything else in the room. So I couldn't see Dr. Friedman, but I could hear him. Every once in a while, he would say, left foot. And these two people are just such a tight team. So James Carter would say, Beth, scrunch up your left foot. And I would. Okay, now open up. Now wiggle your big toe. Wiggle each of the toes. And just like flop your ankle around a little bit. So Dr. Friedman gets to see, he didn't cut too deep yet, so he hasn't done anything there. And then we'd have another conversation, keep going, and then I would hear Dr. Friedman say, left hand. And again, James Carter would tell me exactly what to do, exactly these motions to make. And so during the surgery, I was awake. I remember it like it was this morning. It's absolutely incredible memories. And during the surgery, I realized that my hand was fine. In real time, I knew that I still had my hand. Now, the worst case scenario that we expected from this was that I might not have full function of my left hand, and that was fine. I mean, I just want to kind of go on with the rest of my life, but that I was willing to accept that would be a small risk in the scheme of things. But I could tell during the surgery, and I could tell my buddy James Carter, my left hand's working. I feel it. It's working. It's doing everything I want it to do. Great. One other memory from surgery, and I'll move on, and that is the sound of vacuuming. Like at the dentist, that thing they use to like suck the leftover liquid out or whatever. I was hearing that sound, and I'm thinking, what the heck can that be? So I asked James Carter, what's the suction sound? And he's like, well, and I heard Dr. Friedman actually answer part of this. He's like, well, the tumor is mostly liquid, so we're just, I'm carving away what I need to carve away, and then we're sucking it out. And I'm thinking, they're vacuuming my brain. They're vacuuming my brain, and my hand is working. Brilliant, brilliant. So everything then was going just fine. Everything was going according to plan. I spent one night in the ICU, got up the next morning, and I've always kind of been a little bit of an overachiever, and I guess I let myself get a little carried away, and I was walking laps around the ICU with my IV pole and amusing the nurses and having a big time of it before everybody came in to see me and decided that I could go home. So everything was going according to plan. I was doing great postoperatively. But then we got home. I got sick. I got disoriented. I said that I was going to go sit on the couch, but I was walking out the back door to the garden. And my husband's thinking, that's not okay. So he puts me on the couch safely, and he says, squeeze my hands. He started just copying what everybody else was doing from the neurological exams, right? So I squeezed, no problem. I couldn't use my left hand. So clearly there's something not good going on. Back to the ER, and let them know on the way that I was coming or whatever. So back to the ER, and it turns out that I had a bleed, had a hematoma, and so opened me back up again, another jack-o'-lantern cut, and I don't know what they did. This time I have no recollection at all. In fact, I only have 3 memories from that visit. One is I must have been like getting pushed on a gurney or something, because I kept seeing these white circles, and the white circles were connecting into this intricate, beautiful pattern, this bright white. Now, it was not a light at the end of the tunnel. So don't, it wasn't that kind of experience. But this, this beautiful image of these white circles, which I assume are from light fixtures or something, but it was I wasn't on anything other than anti-seizure medication, and it was some sort of a hallucination. It was interesting. The second thing is I managed to croak out one comment, which is, "I don't know what's happening." And this very kind voice replied, "That's okay, we do." I was like, oh, that's really good. And the third thing I remembered of three is seeing Alan Friedman's face and hearing him say, "We operate in 15, and everybody just jumped into action. And I knew that I was going to be fine. He was there. I was at peace. Everything's going to be fine. I'm where I'm supposed to be, and these are the people who are taking care of me." So that's another example of the roller coaster ride where you're not quite sure what's going to happen. Thankfully, nothing like that's happened again. Here is where I would like to thank my primary caregiver, my husband, Dean. After this second surgery, I was one odd-looking character. You can see here. So this is after it was much better. Bruising was initially from my forehead to collarbone. And, we're not talking gray. We're talking the whole purple, orange, green. It was quite the thing. And, as I guess love is blind sometimes. In this case, it was. One thing I learned from this, one of the surprising things I've learned on this journey was that when I looked so different, you might even say grotesque, I decided to just if you're going to look like an extra in one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you may as well put on the head wrap and the dangly earrings and go for it, right? So that's what I did. And I went around town and I went to the grocery store and no one looked at me. I thought that people would stare. I thought I would have a chance to say, "You should see the other guy." I never did. No one stared. No one looked at me. I was invisible. I was invisible. I would much rather have had stares. And I learned from that maybe it's the people who are most disadvantaged that deserve our smiles the most. Anyway, so and I also learned that no matter what I looked like, I was just going to get out there anyway. That was good. So continuing now with the standard of care. Surgery's done, a little bit of a recuperation break, and now it's time to start 33 straight weekdays of chemo at 9 a.m. and radiation therapy at 10 a.m. So this is here Dr. John Kirkpatrick, fabulous doctor, fabulous human being, engineer, physicist, oncologist, radiation oncologist, just brilliant. Was my primary provider at this point. And he figured out the exact mapping of radiation to complement the temozolomide chemo during this phase. So every day, instead of going to the office at my little startup, I came here. Another thing at this point in the journey that was so difficult for me was what one of my PAs called getting to know the new me. It's a different person in some ways, not in others, but cognitively, I had lost some of the skills, and to this day, they're mostly still lost, some of the skills that sort of made me who I was professionally, and in particular, the ability to rapidly assimilate information from a lot of different sources and come up with conclusions and strategies and business kind of stuff. Multitasking was difficult. One story here is there was a moment when I was in the kitchen, I was cutting carrots. Complicated stuff. Cutting carrots, and my husband started talking to me. And I had to make a decision if I was going to have a conversation with him, listen to him, or if I was going to cut the carrots. I'll let you guess which I did, but I'm able to cut carrots and have a conversation at the same time again, and I have been able to for months. But that simple kind of thing, you know, I couldn't do anymore. Physical limitations as well. Even now, bending over gives me an instant headache, so yoga's out. Anything that requires a helmet or a mask or anything is out because I just have no interest in putting pressure on my head. Letting go of my career and professional identity was pretty difficult. And you may say that's not really something that, you know, healers or my healthcare providers, my healthcare team would really be immediately concerned about. But they were sort of thinking about the whole me, and not just my neuropsychologist, because she actually helped me through that in some very specific ways. But that's a big loss for somebody who, you know, worked in high tech for 30 years, and now I can't, like, put 3 ideas together. Stamina was an issue. I went from being sort of that annoying Energizer bunny person to being a couch potato. And then perhaps the biggest loss was the sense that I thought I knew where my future was going, and suddenly I had no idea. I've gotten so that I still have no idea, but I'm more okay with it now. Had some gains, time, a sense of what might be possible. With all these losses and limitations, what is still there? And over time, I'm learning more and more about that. So here, that's the first time I've ever had a McDonald's logo in any presentation that I've given. Thankfully, my spiffy little startup had long-term disability insurance. Of course, bigger companies I'd worked for had this, but even, I guess it's part of attracting talent in Silicon Valley and in other tech markets, is you got to have it. So thankfully, had this insurance, and my Duke care team really helped me out. So they did a lot of administrative work. They faxed hundreds of pages to Omaha, Nebraska, you know, as part of my application for long-term disability. Social worker helped me. And here, Dr. Rayner, the neuropsychologist that I mentioned to you before, was so helpful because I had this tremendous sense of guilt. There are people who need this long-term disability. They need the money more than me. They're in more pain than me. And yet, glioblastoma is on this short list of things that basically you get approved like that for long-term disability. So that may sound administratively like great, but you don't want to be on that list, obviously. But I am. And one of the fears months later that I had when Mutual of Omaha shows up with an audit to see if I'm still eligible, I talked to Dr. Rayner about it, and I said, what if they conclude that I'm well enough? I mean, I'm well enough to do some things, right? I write, I do different things. What if they conclude that I'm well enough to go work at McDonald's? And she said, there's no way you could work at McDonald's. I was like, what do you mean? She said, there's no way that you could process changing information like that. And by the way, it's information that doesn't matter to you. There is no way that you could work at McDonald's. I was thinking, okay, so the good news is I don't have to worry about that scenario. The bad news is I'm not even competent to work at McDonald's. Really? Really. And so thankfully, no issue. The long-term disability continues to support our lifestyle without having to make any changes that a lot of people go broke and really have other difficult, non-health related difficulties when a big disease hits the family. So then I realized that I had in me all this need to communicate. I've been a communicator for all these years. As I learned to cope, I found this need for self-expression and decided to start a blog. I used to write blog posts. Why not write a blog? So I've created that, and to date I've had don't know, like 9,000 people read this from 126 countries. I don't even know people in 126 countries, but this is how these things go, right? And I like to quote some of my favorite philosophers. Now, it does include Shakespeare. It includes some great scientists as well, but, you know, there's a fair number of, there's John Lennon and Bono and others that are in there as well. So check this out if you're interested. It goes into more detail on sort of the chronology of the disease progression and the chronology of my experience. More recently, I've started getting a bit more introspective, including a piece on sources of hope and handling hardship with grace. Basically, how is it that I can be dealing with this monster and I'm still this incredibly happy person, and I'm positive about it, and I just drink hope for breakfast, as does everybody in the brain tumor clinic across the courtyard here. So the next roller coaster dip turn in the dark was a seizure. So all of this started in June 2015. So now it's August 2015, and I have a seizure. I had no idea what a seizure was like. I wish I had, because if I had known that, I would not have feared that I was dying. I would have realized that it was actually a minor seizure. But if you have no idea what a seizure is, I mean, you know, I'm a fairly smart person, but I've never been in one of these seats. I've never learned about it. I've never had a friend or family member. I just had no reason to know, and hadn't occurred to me that if you're on anti-seizure medicine, maybe you should go learn about this. Beth never did. And so this was a very alarming situation. The left side of my face sort of collapsed, and my speech was slurred, and I immediately feared, you know, another bleed, or who knows what's going on. I had no idea, or a stroke, or, you know, I had no idea what it was. But I did have the idea of maybe as a diagnostic tour, I should take a video. You know, so I'd grab my phone, which is always at hand, of course, but it's always at hand, especially given that I might need help at some point. So I grab my phone and I take a little video of this seizure so that I can be heard. And later, at least one doctor listened to it and didn't laugh, which I appreciated. Even though I forgot to put it on selfie mode, so the video itself was of the kitchen counters. But the lesson here was anything that might be a risk, I should learn about it. And I hadn't. So what could have been a minor thing was traumatic to me. So learning a lot along the way. Next turn in the roller coaster, a second lesion. This time in the frontal lobe. Now, to this day, we don't have a tissue sample. We didn't operate on it, but to this day, we still don't know whether this was actually a glioma. This might have been a benign satellite tumor. We'll probably never know, and that's fine. It's not worth cutting in there just to get a little piece and find out. But from the way it's behaving, we don't know. We don't need to know. We treat it the same way anyway. But it was traumatic to have a second lesion because now I'm multi-site. And the approach for treating this, instead of surgery or just the chemo and standard radiation, was to go blast the living daylights out of this thing. So Dr. John Kirkpatrick, again, does an intricate mapping of exactly where radiation beams are going to be painted onto this tumor, and in subsequent MRIs, we could see that it was largely broken up. Not much can survive that little attack there. So that was. I felt like, I mean, it was a trauma, and it still is traumatic to know that I've got two. Actually, as you'll find out soon, it's not just two anymore. Tumor sites, but the approach to care just unfolded seamlessly and worked out pretty well. The next thing that happened is there's a section of my scalp that still hadn't healed from the two surgeries. And this is after 5 months. And so I went on one type of antibiotics, and that didn't do the trick. So another type of antibiotics, third type of antibiotics. And the fourth type nafcillin required a PICC line. So that's fine. These kind and very humorous people put the PICC line in, so that's all fine. And I lived with this battery-operated pump that I took with me to, volleyball games, and I slept with it, and, it was just always around. Learned how to change bags and such. And then one day, laying on the couch, and the alarm on this bag starts going off. It seemed like it was screaming, and I had no idea what was going on. So I call the helpline, and they're like, "Is there air in the line?" Like, I look. Yeah, there's a bubble. And they said, "Is the air bubble big?" And I said, "Well, how many millimeters defines big? Or is it like a ½ inch?" I didn't know. I mean, this person I was talking to had no idea. And they said, "I don't know, just is it big?" And I said, "I don't know what big means in this setting. There's an air bubble in the line that connects to my heart. So yeah, it's big," but they couldn't tell me. Again, this is an area where I wish I'd taken more time to learn more than I did, so I would know not to be traumatized, because this was avoidable. I had a really good solution for this, which was to call my friend Frank, who's an ER doc who lives 3 houses down, and he just came over, and there in the kitchen, he flushed it, and he showed me how to break it up, and he showed me what big was and what to do, and so it all worked out just fine. But it's another case of where an avoidable trauma, just ignorance, led me to have a crisis when it really didn't have to be a crisis. So there have been, once every 3 months or so, we have an administrative crisis. And you may think this doesn't affect healthcare, but if you're a cancer patient and you're on chemo and you find out for some crazy reason that you can't get your meds, that's a crisis. And I'm a mother, and I'm thinking, I'm trying to keep my family intact, and you're telling me that, in this case, I'm only sharing one of these administrative crises with you because they get dull pretty quickly, so I just chose one that had a nice picture. What happened in this case is the change of the year, so a year ago, and my insurance company had failed to update their contract with the specialty pharmacy, but I can only get my chemo from the specialty pharmacy. So I can't get my chemo. And we finally work it out. My husband's an attorney, I'm a business person, we each spend about 5 hours on the phone one day, working through supervisor to supervisor, trying to figure out how we get this done. In the end, we spent $4,000 of our own dollars to get me 5-day dose of the Timodar, and kept moving. And what about all the people that don't have the negotiation skills, the wherewithal to question authority, and that don't have $4,000 they can just kind of, put on this problem and get their chemo? Do they go without? They were telling me that it was going to be 2.5 weeks. It probably would have been fine. But it was a crisis which increased my stress, increased that, which is a health risk, right, if you're already kind of borderline. So it was something where, and my team at Duke was great about helping in every way they could, but it's just another example of where things that are completely outside what appears to be healthcare affect the well-being of the patient. Next dip in the roller coaster is a third lesion, this time in the right temporal lobe. Okay, so 3 lesions now, and it's time for another course of treatment. This makes me eligible for a particular trial where the medication seemed to be an excellent fit for the chemical makeup of my tumor. So I went on this trial, and one thing here I found very interesting, there's a psychological test, which I guess I passed because they let me into the trial. But one of the things in the psychological test that I had to answer is, how do you feel about yourself? If you're ever involved in trials and there's a test like this, I ask you, please, include another answer to this question. I feel great about myself. I'm fighting. I'm going to beat this damn thing. Like this is an opportunity to feel good about yourself, and I had the choice of saying I feel bad about myself or this is it. Anyway, just a thought for anybody when you're doing psychological tests. Dr. Dina Randazzo, my primary oncologist, fabulous human being, really thinks in terms of my life, not just my tumor, not just me. Encouraged travel, so I took some excellent trips during 2016, went to visit my son in Germany, went with my brothers to the Grand Canyon, and then our family went to Spain for some time. And that was some of the best advice I could ever get. She's like, just take your naps, when the family was accommodating and all. So 8 weeks, first MRI after I start the trial, and the third tumor site, the right temporal lobe, has expanded. As Dr. Friedman said earlier, you can't tell the difference in an MRI between tumor growth and inflammation. So we had some decent reasons to think that inflammation could be, what's going on here. But clearly it's time for a change. So here comes Avastin, one of the things that we talked about earlier. So the third course of treatment was Avastin plus CCNU, so we heard about that in Dr. Friedman's talk as well. Attacking the cancer cells and preventing the growth of the blood supply. And a few weeks later, you can see a much improved MRI. So on the right is the one that I showed you a moment ago, and then on the left is just a few weeks later, 6 or so weeks later. Must have been inflammation. You can't know, right? But greatly improved results. So of all the pictures in here, this one's still my favorite. This was really promising. And then came the first of several instances where I've had an opportunity to sort of be the previous me, tap into some of the skills that I used to use. Some of the cognitive loss is still there, but there are skills there that you don't know they're there until you test them. So as Phil mentioned, I presented at Fuqua and felt like I was soaring just to be able to do something that I used to do. And though I'm clearly there only because I'm a brain tumor patient, that's what made me relevant to the audience. I could still do this task and be present and really enjoy it. And it was just brilliant to have an opportunity to do that. I'd like to make one plug for another area of health and what is part of sort of my self-care, and that is, I had some back pain. If you see me going like this all the time, it's just fitting in a little physical therapy as I sit in the room. So I'm a huge fan of physical therapy. It's been very important in managing pain that's not directly related to my brain tumor, not directly related to glioblastoma, but indirectly, I think I'm out of shape. I'm out of alignment from, sleeping on the same side for 19 months because I can't put pressure on this side of my head. I mean, various things. So indirectly affected and in some pain. And I've, with my oncologist's suggestion, tried acupuncture. Massage is helpful, and physical therapy is absolutely required for feeling well. Another example of doing something that I could feel pretty good about was Dr. Friedman talked about Matthias Gromeyer, who is, he came and spoke at an event that I hosted at a restaurant in Carborough that we raised $25,000 in one night for an organization called Angels Among Us, which fuels research done by Gromeyer and others specific to brain tumor treatments and cures, as I like to say. At the end of September, I had very worrisome MRI results, but days later, my family lived under this dark cloud for a few days, and days later, Dr. Dr. Friedman and Randazzo and the rest of the team, Malika, who's the head of the pharmacy for the Brain Tumor Clinic, a number of others came up with a new option for me, which was to go on Keytruda immunotherapy. And it's just of all the examples I can give of advocacy of my healthcare team, this is just amazing. So I am now the first person with my particular disease progression, first person in the country, which might mean the first person on the planet, with this particular disease progression on this combination of medications with Keytruda and continuing Avastin. And I'm back on Timidor as well now, but that's kind of beyond the story. Yeah, we need to finish up. Okay, that's fine. So since then, there have been a few other shifts in the roller coaster ride, but on the Keytruda, I have had some promising results. Tumor growth, which hopefully is just inflammation, but if you look at those black cells in the middle, we think that's necrosis. We think that the tumor may be dying from the inside. Yay. Continuing to get on with life, not only attending all my kids' things, but taking pictures. Still on the journey. I think I've probably talked, I know we're about out of time, but still, talked a lot about the exemplary medical attention at Duke and the approach to care, which always includes, there's always a next step. I know that no matter what happens with my current, with this immunotherapy, I know that no matter what happens, there's going to be another step, another possibility. In fact, I bet you my oncologist already has 2 worked out, so that if the next MRI shows some unfortunate results, I bet she's already got 2 of them worked out that we can choose what we want as the next, what's going to be the next course of care. One thing from having such excellent care, I feel enormous gratitude, I feel enormous responsibility to give back. And at the Brain Tumor Center, there's actually a built-in opportunity for patients to give back via the Angels Among Us program, raising money for research. And that's a real gift that I don't have to go figure out something I can do to be helpful. I can just join something that's already underway and that makes a lot of sense. I would like to, I think I'll end probably very soon here. Okay. I want to share with you over at the Brain Tumor Center, if you ever wander around over there, there's pictures and handwritten notes, and I want to read this one to you. My name is Daryl Bigner. I lead the research program of the Brain Tumor Center. I chose this work because current treatment and prevention of brain tumors is inadequate. Yes. Hope to me means that there are better ways to treat and ultimately prevent brain tumors. Many of those discoveries will take place at Duke. Absolutely. Excellent. So I've shared some of my thoughts, some of my experience, and I would tell you now that I feel as though the second greatest gift of my life, the first being family, is that there's something next for me. I'm not quite sure what it's going to be. I think it's going to involve writing and who knows what else. But there's something next for me that I am going to be able to give back. And it's because of the expertise in technology. It's because of the friends and family and self-care. And it's very much because of the approach to care, which is one of hope and really caring for the person and the family. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your choice to be healers. During your studies and during your years of practice, we're going to nail some of these big diseases. And you're going to have the opportunity to heal more people, keep more families intact. Some of you will be the people who bring some of those out of the research arena and into the clinic, right? And so I wish you all the best of luck, and I thank you for becoming healers.